Let's go ahead and get into the student athletes here. We're going to do a college football moment, a college basketball moment, and then highlight the best boys and girls athlete from the past year. So first, let's go ahead and hop into college football. And B. Scott, I want to apologize because I know this was most likely, I'm stealing your Purdue thunder a little bit. I know you're probably going to go with another moment.
You can't. There's a lot of moments from Purdue this past season.
That's true. That is true. But I'm going to go with Purdue upsetting number 3 Michigan State, highlighted by the.
That's not one I would have picked.
Really? See,
Yeah,
I
not
went.
one I would have picked.
I went with it because for one, I tried to pick games that not only had, meaning and memorable meaning to it, but also like a memorable play. And I mean the play, the trick,
Bell catch.
the trick play, 39-yard touchdown from Aiden O'Connell to Jackson Anthrop. I mean that was an iconic play. Aiden O'Connell ends the game with 536 yards and 3 touchdowns. Purdue had knocked off earlier in the season Iowa, who was number 2 at the time. And these wins had the Boilermakers in the conversation legitimately of winning the Big Ten West. I mean, especially since their next opponent was Ohio State, who they had upset, in 2018. People were calling them the Spoilermakers. I mean, I remember us on the podcast, we were hyped about it because we were like, is this going to be a moment where Purdue can sneak into the Big Ten championship game? What's going to happen?
Well, you got to remember Purdue, in the history of college football, Purdue has the most wins against top 5 teams when they're unranked.
Yeah,
that's unreal, but
yeah, it's
unfortunate that they're unranked, but it's
right.
it's the truth.
Well, it's emblematic of Purdue sports, where like the Purdue can only get that big win when they're not really in the conversation. Once they step into the conversation, that's when, they go on the road the next week against Ohio State and get their doors blown off, which is what happened after that. And you can look at a lot of moments. I mean, I'm sure, Notre Dame has some cool moments to throw in there. There might have been some better, moments from maybe small college football. Maybe we'll add a category for small college football maybe next year or something like that. But, whenever there's a moment, whenever your team gets a nickname, the Spoilermakers, that makes the year you're having an iconic year because you can kind of flash back. I mean, I know that an iconic moment from that 2018 season was that one over Ohio State for so much, so for so many more reasons other than just a football game. And that's not that this moment compares to that one at all, but in the sense that, whenever you have kind of an iconic moment, you can go back and remember when Purdue was called, this is a season or a game from Purdue where, in a couple of years, you're going to be like, remember when Purdue beat Michigan State and the next week they were referred to as the Spoilermakers just because they were in the hunt, that's kind of what makes the moment iconic for me, and Purdue caps off the season with the win over Tennessee in the Music City Bowl. So, a fantastic year from Purdue, and I think that was a moment that really wrapped it all together.
So I'm actually going with that Music City Bowl victory over Tennessee. Look, Purdue came out flat in that game, and it was like, oh boy, this is a very much vivid reminder of what happened to Purdue the last time they were in the Music City Bowl against Auburn and just got their doors blown off. And that was a good team. That was, I believe, David Blau was quarterback. Rondell Moore was a freshman. I mean, it was a good team. Obviously, they beat the doors off Ohio State just a few weeks earlier. And yeah. So you go, oh gosh, okay, here we go again. Settle in for it. It's gonna be over with by halftime. And all of a sudden, second quarter gets around, Purdue rallies back and actually takes a lead into halftime. You're like, okay. And then for it to be just a back and forth affair in that fourth quarter. I mean, that was probably one of the most exciting fourth quarters in a non New Year's Six college football playoff, BCS bowl that you've seen. I mean, you didn't know which way it was going to go. And it was just like 2 heavyweights just trading blows back and forth, whether it was Payne Durham bouncing off defenders for a 65-yard touchdown or Brock Thompson running with basically 2 bad beat up legs and getting the game MVP, or Purdue shutting down Tennessee on the 1-yard line of 4th and goal. I mean, unbelievable moments. And the fact that Purdue went into Nashville for the Music City Bowl and beat a predominant fan base of Tennessee. and beat Tennessee that day without George Karlaftis, without David Bell, and without Milton Wright. They were without their top 2 receivers and their best defensive player. And they had there was some other guys that were out with injuries too. And along the way, they lost TJ Sheffield to a foot or ankle injury. I mean, it was just like, it was kind of like that Colts game against the Cardinals. Had Purdue lost that game, Purdue fans had been like, yeah, we probably should have lost that game because we were without so many players. Like some of our top players were out. And for the fact that Purdue won that game and looked good in doing so is why you're seeing the hype surrounding this team for this coming season, because majority of the players that are coming back were the ones that performed at a high level against Tennessee. So that is my state of Indiana college football moment of the year, because it capped off a 9-win season, the first time that's happened for Purdue since 2003. And it really set up momentum for the Boilermakers heading into the 2022 season, where they kick off the season Thursday night, prime time on Fox, under the lights against Penn State. So it has an opportunity to carry that momentum right into the start of this next season to get another big victory.
Yeah, that'll be a big one for sure. And I mean, you mentioned the fact that, it was in Tennessee. You kind of forget about that during the bowl season, that like a lot of these games, especially that aren't the New Year's Six bowls, are like basically home games for one of the teams. And Tennessee at Neyland Stadium is bigger than Nissan Field. So like there were probably more Tennessee fans, that they could have easily filled that with all Tennessee fans, but yet, just a great way for Purdue to go in there and get the win. So yeah, it makes that much more sweet.
The biggest part of that game, one of the biggest takeaways I'll take from that one, is that Tennessee fan that recorded himself taunting one of the Purdue band members. He was like, "We're going to kill you guys. We're going to beat your asses up and down the field." And the band member's like, "I'm just here to play music." And then there was a video of that Tennessee fan walking out just completely defeated at the end of the game. And it was great. It was absolutely great.
It's wild because some of those, I mean, look, I understand that when it comes to football, the SEC is better than the Big Ten overall. It's just so funny because even like the fans of like the SEC schools that are like on pretty even terrain with Big Ten schools, they still like, I mean, you have super fans like that in every fan base. I'm not trying to just single out the
this was a college student. He was hammered. So.
Well, right, but I mean, I
wouldn't call him a super fan or
but I mean, you said that, and the first thing I thought of was like a 40-year-old dude in like a Tennessee cowboy hat with no shirt. Like I had a full picture. I was like, no shirt, a Tennessee flag like tied around his, around his neck.
No, that's how Big Ten fans dress for football games.
Maybe that's
in the SEC. Maybe that's they wear polo shirts or button-up shirts and khakis, and like it's like a Sunday trip
brunch.
To church.
Yeah. That is true. I didn't think about it that way, but yeah, you are right there. Moving over to college basketball, and you know what? In lieu of, what we're not going to talk about them probably till next basketball season anyway, IU. We're going to talk about them a little bit come college football season, but we always get talked about. We're going to
talk about them come college football. I mean,
we're going
to
do a preview. It's not gonna be a long.
I'll give you a sneak peek. Ofer in the Big Ten.
Well, exactly. So we get talked about. We that we don't know what we're talking about when it comes to IU and what we're IU haters. So I'm gonna give them a little bit of love here. My college basketball moment is IU defeating Purdue for the first time since 2016 in Assembly Hall. Rob Finney with the late 3-pointer to seal the win. It's kind of like
the guy from Lafayette.
Right.
The guy from Lafayette.
It's kind of like with the Colts win over the Patriots, where you had an IU team that had lost 9 straight to the Boilers. IU was 14-4 heading into this game. This was a big statement game for the Hoosiers because we've seen IU teams start with great records in the past, 14-4, 13 whatever, and they end up falling flat when it comes to the Big Ten part of the schedule. And they were under first-year head coach Mike Woodson. Purdue's ranked number 4, so. In years past, or any of the years between 2017 and 2021, 2022, this would have been a prime letdown game for IU. But instead IU rises to the occasion. They get the win, big 3 at the end of the game. This was a defining win in a season where IU made a step back in the right direction as far as the program is concerned. They rallied after a rough February and March to get into the NCAA tournament for the first time since 2016. I remember, on that podcast, going into conference tournaments saying, you know what, if they've got a chance, they still have a punching chance to get into the NCAA tournament. They have to beat Michigan, they have to beat Illinois, and that's exactly what they did. And they got into the tournament. They defeated Wyoming in the first 4. This was easily the best season for IU basketball in some time. It's kind of that cliche where, you want your rival to be good too, so that way it's a good game. So like as a Purdue fan, a Purdue leaning podcast, it's nice to win. IU has good teams. That way it's more fun. It's kind of like this year. I mean, this was when Purdue played Notre Dame this year. This is the first time Purdue's played Notre Dame in some time, but also the first time really in a long time that Purdue hung with Notre Dame. So it's nice to see that come to fruition. Nice to have some competitive balance within the state. So IU coming back, getting that big win, and it leading to them rallying late in the year to make the NCAA tournament. I think that makes it a special year for them and a special moment.
Yeah, I mean, that really was a big moment for them. I mean, you can't really think of too many big moments for Purdue per se.
Well, not that weren't followed up immediately by bad moments.
Right. I mean,
because
I think if you have to look at, for me, my moment for Purdue was a great moment and a historical moment for the basketball program, but it was immediately followed up by not so good. My moment, I mean, I can look at moments like going out to Connecticut to, I think it was the Mohegan Sun tournament or whatever it is, and beating both North Carolina and Villanova in November. That was really kind of set a threshold for that team. Like, okay, this team really could be something special. But for me, I think the moment of the year was definitely getting that number 1 ranking, because that had never happened in program history before. Yeah, it was followed up by an upset loss at Rutgers, but a lot of teams ended up losing at Rutgers this past year, so I don't feel too bad about that one. And it is something that's another goal to get back to. And honestly, yeah, we all know, it doesn't matter if you're ranked number 1 in the middle of the season. What really matters is if you win the championship at the end.
It doesn't matter if you're ranked number 1 going into the tournament. It doesn't matter.
Exactly. I just asked Gonzaga.
Right.
But it was a defining moment, because when you look back on Purdue, I mean, they've had some great players, some great coaches. I mean, Gene Katie, you would think, oh, look, Purdue has been a 1 seed in the tournament how many times? They've been up there quite a few. They've been to the Final Four, been on the doorstep of the Final Four several times, but to know that they've never had that number 1 in front of them and during the regular season, it was kind of shocking honestly to see that. But for that to finally happen and them it only lasted a week, but hey, it still happened. They can be taken off the list of teams that have never been ranked number 1, and now they are on the list of teams that have been, and it feels right. It feels like that next step for a program that is still searching for that ever elusive national championship or Final Four appearances as well.
Yeah. I mean, you look through the Katie seasons, any of the years that Hummel was there, like any of those seasons, you would have thought Purdue at one point.
They got as high at one point when Carson Edwards, I believe, was a sophomore, and they had, his sophomore year, when they had Vince Edwards, Dakota Mathias, Isaac Haas, Caleb Swanigan. That team, they got as high as number 3 when they were on that 19-game win streak, but never got up to number 1.
Yeah, that's pretty wild.